Hi, everybody, and a huge welcome to the last talk of Sheffield Doc Fest this year. It is my absolute pleasure and honour, I might add, to welcome Sam Feder and Amy Scholder for the Netflix Masterclass about their extraordinary film Disclosure, which I hope you've all seen on Netflix. If not, please see this film on Netflix. It was hugely inspiring and moving and educational for me, and I hope it would be for you too. Thanks for being here, Sam and Amy. It's great to meet you.
Hi, Daisy. Thanks so much.
We're going to see a little clip from the film now, very short clip, and then we're going to have some questions for Sam and Amy. Enjoy, everybody. So tantalizingly short clip there. Hopefully you're all going to see this film if you haven't already. Welcome again, Sam and Amy, and thanks for being with us. I would love to ask you about how this film was made, about the form of this film, and not just about the content. Hopefully we'll get around to all of that. But to start with, I think the film very importantly challenges and rewrites its own story, queering the history of trans representation in a very powerful way. Did you set out to make a film that would resist the narrative of death, sickness, and evil surrounding trans people in the archive, and to kind of reclaim one of the love and success and family, joy, pleasure? And how heavy was that responsibility for you?
I mean, that's a really interesting question, and I think that speaks to sort of the layers within the film, and I'm glad you are addressing that, because that's not something we often talk about. You know, there is so much at work in the film. You know, it is about rewriting, or it's about writing history, and it's about claiming history. It's about, as Laverne likes to say, writing a new ending. You know, it's about, you know, nuance and inclusion, and it's, you know, looking at the racism and the classism and the sexism that goes, you know, from the beginning of film and television. But it's also, you know, on a very direct level, you know, there is this archival history that we're looking at that is full of these tropes you've mentioned, and then there are these 30 plus trans people holding and containing and giving context to that. We did not joy and positivity and sure, that's something we want, but that's not necessarily the framing with which we approached it. Like, Amy and I have very complicated feelings about visibility. Like, our main argument the whole time was like, what is this paradox? Like, how are we looking at this paradox? What does this paradox say when we have this increase of seemingly positive representation along with an increase of social and legislative violence, right? Like, what does this mean? What does it mean to have a handful of trans people in the spotlight being glamorous and very hegemonically wonderful, beautiful, you know, held in space and time, and then most other trans people are disproportionately underemployed, you know, face unsafe housing, don't have access to healthcare, you know, and facing our government, you know, trying to write us out of existence. Like, how do you hold that paradox? And that is what we were looking at with this film more than anything else. Amy, do you want to add to that?
No. Well said. Thank you.
Yeah, you smashed it, Sam. Yeah, I mean, Laverne in the film describes beautifully how careful we have to be, actually, when we are gorgeous and talented trans superstars, and that those people are elevated to acceptability, as you describe. And so, leading on from that, how do you think these kind of documentaries can change things for the trans person in the street, as it were?
Go ahead, Amy, you have something top of mind?
Well, you know, I'm just thinking about how, you know, important it was for us to begin to write a history of the way gender has been depicted in the history of film and television, because of this moment that we're in, you know, where there was that sense of the transgender tipping point in 2014 that was declaring something that was really, Sam has said in the past, tipping point for whom, right? There was a cover of Laverne Cox on the cover of Time magazine, and she's looking defiant and gorgeous, and the headline is transgender tipping point, and I think we were aware that if we don't understand what has led to this perception of a tipping point, we're really not going to be able to determine what the future of that is. So this was a part of that, hopefully, of a process of that involves so many levels, representation, activism, et cetera, to move forward.
Thanks, Amy. Can you talk a little bit about the filmmaking process? How did you decide on the way that you would make this film? It's very refreshing that it isn't a kind of chronological history of laws and protests, and of which there haven't been enough, you could argue, but an emotional history of lives that continue to be lived regardless of all of those things. How did you decide to do that, or did it seem obvious to you?
I mean, I think what more than anything else is our hope, right? Our dream was that trans people would walk into the theater, go through this history, and have a cathartic experience, right? Feel that often what they've seen in isolation, either literal isolation or among people who didn't understand them, what they had seen over a lifetime that they had internalized, right? The hate, the shame, the violence. Now they could see it outside of themselves, held in a context by trans people who are seemingly thriving and surviving in the world, and be able to move past it in a way they hadn't before, right? Being able to see this outside of yourself in this way. And likewise for non-trans people. But for everyone, we were hoping that there would be an actual shift in real time, right? Like sitting and watching and spending this 100+ minutes looking at this footage that we've all been part of, that we've all been implicated in, that we've all loved at some point, maybe hated, maybe been engaged with, but have had some sort of emotional, visceral reaction to something, right, in this film, and start to question why we had that reaction, right? And that moment of question is the growth that we were hoping, or I don't know if growth sounds condescending, but a change, a shift that we were hoping that people would have, and maybe see things a little bit differently, maybe see things with a little more compassion, with an understanding of how these seemingly entertaining jokes actually hurt people and maybe put people in harm's way in life or death situations, which we can certainly talk about. That's not hyperbole. So that more than anything was what we were hoping would happen by the end of the film. And so because of that, we knew we needed to really connect on an emotional level the whole time, right? That this couldn't just be a theoretical, expert sort of taking us through history in a chronological way that could be a little boring. Like, it really needed to keep you on the emotional ups and downs of what it's really like to experience this in real time. And so, there was this, the thinking was, how do we intersect memory with personal anecdotes? And how do we understand memory, right? Our memories jump through time. Our memory isn't linear. The way we understand ourselves in the past and how we hope to see ourselves in the future, there's nothing linear about those experiences in our mind. And so by looking at personal stories and seeing how they organically connect to one another, kind of takes us through the emotional path that we were hoping to bring the audience. So we based it in the anecdotes, right, that we found to be the most compelling and to speak in the largest ways, and then went from there.
Yeah, amazing answer. I think it's in an emotional register all the way through, and that almost invites the audience to feel the things that you wish, rather than to be taught. Perhaps I don't know if you I don't know if you talk about this all the time, you probably do, but I felt like the film had a very subtle understanding, actually, of not only the people who are your participants, but those people who perhaps have been involved in problematic representations of trans people, such as Daniela C. For example, that the film doesn't kind of blame or cancel those actors or makers, even if that those are difficult representations. Oprah, for example, is allowed to learn to do better in her interviews in your film. How important is it to you that we approach this stuff with understanding and, huge resilience in the case of this film, and that we don't kind of permanently cancel people for their mistakes?
Amy is often our emotional barometer for that, so go for it.
I think nuance, I think having nuance is everything, because first of all, there's no, one experience of any film or any TV show or work of art. We can, we can be critical of something and still love it. Or some might, have found, for example, in The Crying Game, the fact that there's that pivotal scene where the Stephen Rea character is in a love scene and discovers that the woman that she loves has a penis, and his reaction is to vomit. And that has proven to be so destructive in so many ways. At the same time, there's no way that you can talk about The Crying Game without acknowledging how important that film was to some people who saw it. For example, Zachary Drucker is interviewed in Disclosure and says how important it was for her to see a beautiful woman with a penis. In that scene, it changed everything for her, for Zachary, and so to hold, these contradictions, to hold both truths, to not insist that what we know now should have been known all along, was really kind of like one of the center, core values we had making Disclosure.
And did you go along with all of that, Sam?
Oh my God, yeah.
Liked Amy's emotional barometer?
Yeah, I think, yeah, no, Amy, Laverne, and I were completely aligned on this. Like, second chances, nuance, gray areas, knowing what we don't know, giving people the benefit of the doubt. That is, I think, lifelong goals for the three of us that we wrestle with, that we talk about, that we think about. We're all going to mess up, right? We're all going to mess up. We're all going to hurt people. And the question is, where do we go from there? Right. And how are we accountable to that? And, in my mind, a lot of it really echoes the work I do in abolition, and, putting people in cages is not the answer to something that disrupts public space, right? Or for whatever reason. So it's like, what is between those two places, and how do we heal a culture and not just put people in cages? It's the same sort of thing. Now, when we talk about cancel culture, that's such a coded word, and I think a lot of that is, I think it predates Me Too, but I think a lot of people still kind of have that association. When there is assault, people need to be held accountable. And I don't necessarily think that I would want to give someone a second chance when there is a blatant, assault, or not so blatant, right? But that's getting into a whole other issue. But when we're talking about like what Amy is saying with art and how we're interpreting art, I think that deserves a conversation rather than a cancellation.
Well, I think this film is the most powerful example of continuing and complicating that conversation, actually, rather than, oversimplifying it, which certainly in the UK, we don't have a lot of trans representation even now. Mm-hmm. And that was a huge takeaway from this, that I'm looking at this film about about US culture, which is not my culture, and perhaps a lot of our viewers today might relate to the idea that we just don't have that many trans representations in the UK. I get the point, which fascinated me about trans men, for example, having a kind of privilege in their invisibility. Um, but we all know, don't we, that young people need to see themselves in order to project forward and find those happy adults in their own futures. So I guess, do you have advice for how we might achieve more and better representation? It was so beautiful when Sandra Caldwell in the film says, "How are these children doing this?" I love that line. It's just so positive. How are these children doing this? And can you help us do it more and better?
Oof. That's a loaded question. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is I actually do know so much trans representation coming out of the UK. If you look towards the queer festivals in particular, right? I mean, I know in London there's a wonderful festival, in Brighton there's a wonderful festival. There is a lot of work happening, and so I think first and foremost, you go there, you go to the people making it, you find the trans filmmakers who are really invested into creating representation that reflects their lives and their values, and that's where you start. It's happening. I don't. You know, there's this woman named Morgan Page who's in London right now, who's brilliant, who I overlapped with in New York a bit, and actually was part of the research for Disclosure. I mean, talk to her, right? To ask people like Morgan to lead the way. There's a lot of wonderful work happening, but I guess I don't know really how to satisfactorily answer that question. I don't know, Amy.
Well, I mean, what we did when we were setting out was to hire trans people, to prioritize hiring trans people, behind the camera. I mean, we only interviewed trans people for the on-camera interviews, but we knew also that it was going to be important. It was going to be key to our film that we also hire people behind the camera. 120 some people went into the making of Disclosure, if you count the in front of and behind the camera. And when we couldn't hire a trans person, then we would have the non-trans person take on a fellow, and we had a fellowship, a training program, so that we were empowering future makers. And some of our fellows now have gone on to start making their own work, and we're really excited about what's come out of our crew. So, I think that by not having a scarcity model to, by, when we were hiring, crewing up, having, realizing that our project was getting bigger and bigger, to like bring on as many folks as we could, it was going to make our film better. And, I'm pleased to see in our own small way that we're also, we've created some future, we've helped in the success of, some of the future makers getting their start.
That's a very inspiring answer. Thanks, Amy. And I think it reminds us all in the industry that really it's talk is not enough. It's all about hiring practices and giving voice, and that the behind the scenes is just as important as in front of the camera. So thank you for that. I noticed that there was a publicity shot of literally everyone you filmed, all in the studio, all at once. I couldn't imagine how you managed to do that. Or is it photoshopped? Like, what? You didn't interview everyone.
No. I think what you saw was our crew.
That was your crew? There were a lot of your stars in there too. Okay.
Each day. No. So we had 3 major shoots. Like, one was January 2018, one was August 2018, and one was November, December 2019. and at one point we would have our crew get together for a shot, and whichever person happened to be there for the interview would jump in. So maybe there was one person or someone from the previous, right? But those are our crew shots, which, as Amy explained, we were so intentional about our hiring practices that, we got very, very, very close with our crew, and that's part of the story. Part of the story is what happened behind the camera, and so that's why that's one of our publicity shots.
But we do have, we did create a consistent set, so that it would seem, I suppose, to the naked eye that it was all on one stage, one sound stage in one setting and one session, God forbid. But we did create, that consistent look for all the interviews. That was intentional. Sam had something very specific in mind for those interviews, and I think that, Sam, I think it's worth kind of talking a little bit about that, like why and how you made those decisions about our set.
Mm. Yeah, it was when I think I realized that this was going to be like a conventional format, right, of talking heads, which is a terrible term, but that it was going to be that. I was really wanting to be really intentional about how to make that beautiful, and that how that framing would be informing the piece, not just like we dropped into someone's living room and set up the camera and then ask them questions. While that in itself is a technique to see what someone's life is like when you look behind them and see, how they've set up their space. But we didn't want to distract with that. We really wanted to foreground what the people were saying and how our cast was presenting themselves, right? So we wanted people to feel their best and look their best. We hired the best hair and makeup people that we knew, and asked people. People were like, what do you want me to wear? And I was just like, whatever makes you feel hot, whatever makes you feel empowered and good. And so in thinking about what would be behind them, I wanted it to create a sense of calm. I wanted it to create, there's like a shallow depth of field, so it's out of focus, but we have all these different textures of light and curtains, so it maybe feels like, we're having windows and space, and it's airy, and the rug is white, the chair is white, the walls are white. There's something I really love about that sense of white texture on top of itself. I think it really gives a sense of space and breathing space, and because the film is so content heavy, is so emotional, and what the people were going to be saying was needed to be paid attention to. I wanted the background to give us that sort of emotional and visual space. In addition, the palette of the footage is all over the place, right? We have footage from 1904 up until 2018. So for everything from the look to the aspect ratio to the actual motion, how it's processing in time, that's a lot for the eye to adjust to. So that was the decision behind designing the set the way we did.
Lovely. I felt almost the white background almost made me feel like I was in heaven. maybe that was partly the storytelling as well. But also it feels to me like that whoever your crew are, and big up to all of those people. I don't know if any of them are aware of this conversation, but that it feels communal and celebratory and supportive and like a collective voice of very individual perspectives within that as well. And I think that that's really powerful. Did you feel that you achieved that yourself? Did you know that you'd achieved that?
I love that. I'm very honored to hear that. As Amy mentioned, it took about 120 trans people to make this film who are included in it. From the beginning, in doing research, when I got inspired to start making this, I thought there would be a book on the topic, that there would be a definitive resource that I would then base the film upon. And, that's what The Celluloid Closet did. They based it on the book that Vito Russo wrote. And that's what Marlon Riggs did when he made the Ethnic Notions and Color Adjustment. It was based on pre-existing books. So I thought, okay, I just got to find my book and then I'll make my film. That book doesn't exist. And so, we spent around 8 months collecting these oral histories from 70 plus trans people around the world, some in person, some over Skype. So from the beginning, it was this, none of this was done in a vacuum. It was always in conversation with as many people as we could be. And, something I love about film is that it's perhaps the most collaborative art practice that exists, right? Like some people do it completely on their own and do it beautifully and magnificently. But that is not why I'm drawn to it at all. I really love the collaborative aspect of it. So, I mean, this film clearly does not speak for every trans person at all. And I'm not even sure everyone in it agrees with everything that is said. But we try to hold a conversation that is happening, that we've heard, happening in many places. Amy, do you have more to add to that?
Amy, I'll provoke you to add to that, if I may. Could you tell me about your working relationship with Sam? How do you two create together?
Well, Sam was working on this project for about 6 months and doing that research that he was just speaking of. And I was a big fan of Sam's last film, Kate Bornstein is Queer and Pleasant Danger. And when I heard about Sam's new project, I knew immediately it's an important project. Sam's, going to do a brilliant job to make it, and I wanted to participate in any way I could, and joined as a producer. And really, we spent 3 years raising money, writing grants, and starting to kind of bring together all the research, and also kind of like align our values and align, like, well, we agreed with having trans crew and interviewing trans people, but how are we going to actually put this together? It was just, I think, I mean, it was a wonderful process, actually, for me. I feel like we were able to stick to our moral compass pretty much throughout. And when Laverne joined us about a year and a half in, is that right, Sam? We'd been working for about a year and a half, really in isolation, just the two of us. And then we met Laverne and she joined us. It did change our game completely. That was a dream come true to have her join our team, become a creative partner, share in some of the research and a lot of the creative decisions that Sam was making as he was putting the film together. So I don't know if I've completely answered that question. It's interesting you asked. No one has asked that question before.
I mean, ultimately, though, I don't know whether it's luck or intentional because we decided to work together, but we're really aligned with our political goals, our social goals, like our goals for social justice. And I mean, I don't want to speak for Amy, but those things for me are cut deep and can be a make or break it kind of thing in any interpersonal relationship. Without giving examples, but anytime we sort of hit what felt like, oh, this is a hard choice to make, it was easy because I had Amy and Laverne to make it, and they were both along with me the whole way. So, that's, like I said, either luck or it's just very intentional that we were all drawn to this project because of those values. I mean, one example I can give without giving names is at one point we were offered $100,000, and that was very early on. In the big view of our budget, that actually wasn't very much money, but at that point, that was significant. And we needed it. We really needed it. And then it came with strings. It very quickly came with strings. And we had to just really, center ourselves and figure that out. And it didn't take long to walk away. And that's, I mean, other filmmakers, I'm sure hearing that would just, I mean, some people's budget are, that could be someone's budget for 5 years, that's a lot of money. But, and at that, and again, that was a lot of money for us at that moment. I mean, I think it was at a moment we thought we were going to have to cancel one of our shoots, one of our biggest shoots. So it was a big, big, big deal. I can't overstress that. But the strings it came with broke our hearts, and there was no question that we would walk away from it. So that's the kind of example where I think, I hope directors think about that. I hope producers think about that when they go into a project that has social significance, which they all do.
That's
right.
incredible.
And I guess I'll just add too, just because we're sounding so earnest, that because Sam and I have been around the block a few times and have had, previous collaborators and previous partnerships, we knew going into this new one that the more we decided in advance about, who's gets the final say in which areas, and the more that we could spell out in advance kind of, if there was a difference of opinion, whose opinion was going to be the deciding one, I think the more it relaxed us to really then, as difficult decisions came up, to really debate them and go into every conversation and every deliberation kind of calmly, knowing that in the end, okay, this is Sam's domain because this is creative and this is a director's, really prerogative, but, and then we could really go about those kinds of considerations, wholeheartedly in without it causing a lot of anxiety. And so I do recommend for folks, as they're making partnerships, to try to anticipate as much in advance, what those parameters are going to be, because then you can really be great partners and really try to, get one another, as informed as possible, and then who's going to make the decision, and you trust that they'll make the right one.
And it was in our contract. Like when we first started to work together and we wrote up a contract, we nailed those out. Yeah.
Wow, I think all filmmakers listening will be kind of maybe floored by the courage and heart of that story, because we all know to turn money down as a documentary filmmaker, it's got to be a rare thing. It's even rarer than being offered money to make something in the so thank you for that. Incredible. Can I ask you both a slightly more personal question? Turn me down if you want. I wondered while I was watching it, if as filmmakers you have a sense of your first experience of maybe seeing yourself or projecting yourself onto a character on the screen. Do you remember what representations hit you as young people?
I love that you added what projected ourselves onto, because I've been asked this question a million times. When did you first see yourself? But never what did you project yourself onto? And obviously those are very enmeshed, but I love thinking about it that way. So I'm going to think about that for another minute. Amy, do you have an answer?
I don't have an answer. So
I'm sorry, it's kind of a hard question to spring on you.
No, it's interesting, and I wonder if because I don't have an answer, it made making this film so compelling. For me as a queer person, I think growing up when I did. In my formative years in the 70s and the 80s, I really didn't see myself. I remember the first time that somebody said to me, "Oh, you remind me of a famous person," and it was the first time when I was really excited about it. And I remember meeting a girl who I um, thought, was totally out of my league and would never be attracted to me. And I realized she was flirting with me, and I didn't even know how to register it. And she said to me, "Oh, you remind me of someone, you remind me of someone." And I was kind of like holding myself and thinking, "Oh, this is going to be cringeworthy." And I was afraid of, what, like, dyke on TV she was going to say I reminded her of, and it was going to be someone I just didn't see myself as at all. And I remember she said, "You remind me of the lead singer of In Excess." And at the and at the and I, it was before the internet, and I like ran to the record store, and I didn't know who that was, and I looked at it, and it was like some sexy long-haired person, and I was so happy. And I remember thinking, "Oh, um, and in a way, I think that was sort of my gender dysphoria, that I had not known how to see myself outside of myself before, and that she saw me in a way that I found really satisfying, complimentary, and completely unexpected. Made me realize something about the layers of identification and gender and all of the issues, I think, that we're trying to get at in disclosure.
Oh, that's fascinating. And of course, it's often others who project gender onto us, especially as
Right,
children, isn't
right.
it? So, and those representations are what influence their projection onto us. Um, Speaking as someone whose sister called me David my entire childhood of her own volition. Interesting. So I'm thinking about Jose Munoz. I mean, I'm sure you know the queer theorist Jose Munoz, who's talked about our problem with our queer story being that we are barely allowed to survive in the present, let alone see ourselves as part of a rich historical heritage, something we can be proud of. Um, and you, I wonder if you understand maybe how much pinning down this story, which is what disclosure does. It's what it did for me. It gives a history to trans people and their lovers and their allies, and an opportunity to, on top of that, build a kind of more confident, optimistic future for ourselves. Did you set out to do that powerful work, create a history for us, or or am I just flattering you?
Both. No, I feel very flattered. I feel very seen and affirmed by that and acknowledged. But yeah, that was our hope for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I have
Amy,
to say, Daisy, I had never heard Amy's In Excess story before, and Amy and I have talked a lot. So you are really good at this. Thank you for finding the story.
I don't think I've ever said that aloud, so you are really good. Or I've had a
it's a
lot of
great
coffee this
story.
morning.
Oh, delighted that you felt that you could share that with us. It will stay with me for sure. Um,
I mean, I think that, we were, um, setting out to shift the lens of this history, right? I mean, there's this 100 plus years of film and TV, and those stories have informed so much of how, what the kind of archetypes are in our culture of what it is to be human, and so to shift the lens to a trans lens, was to look at that history in a particular way. And every marginalized community, I think, has that experience of being othered or dehumanized by dominant storytelling, dominant culture. And when you shift the lens, you can and see that history in a new light, as Sam quoted Laverne, you can, maybe write a new ending to the story.
Yeah. I was really moved by Jen's comment. Jen Richards says in the film that she had to see it, and once she'd seen it, I'm slightly paraphrasing. When she'd seen that, now she wants that, and so your expectations for the self, for the way you might be loved, or the way you might be received, or have impact in the world, are totally transformed by a film like this.
Oof, I hope so. I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not. That might be the next step for something else. But I hope at least the understanding of what is possible is opened up for some people. Um, that moment that you're quoting, Jen, is probably one of the most quoted moments of the film, and it is one of the few stories that Jen shared with me that I'd never heard before. And I'd never heard before. Jen and I have been in conversations about this since we met in 2014. And I've read everything Jen's written, and she's become a good friend of mine. And for disclosure, I think we interviewed her for about 7 hours for obvious reasons. Like she can do a lot for a film. And that story she had never said out loud. It was truly a really vulnerable moment. Like, oh my gosh, it's rare for someone to allow you to witness such a vulnerability. And such an accessible moment that everyone can relate to. This is not just about trans people. We all just want to be loved. We all just want to be seen in that way. So, I think that's why it just resonates across our viewers, regardless of their identities. So I think I hope it just allows more expansive imaginations around those possibilities.
Okay, so that leads me beautifully into my next question. Thank you, Sam, which is to both of you, what do you want to see? What is the representation that needs to happen next? Like, what do we want, a trans superhero, or do we want incidental transgender characters in dramas where it doesn't matter that whether somebody is trans or not? Which way do you choose personally to go? If you could just have your wish.
Both.
Okay.
I'm working on projects that do both. I am literally working on a superhero project, and I'm working on a love story,
Wow.
right? So it's like both. And in any story about a trans person, what you need to hold on to is anything you're saying about them suggesting that we aren't who we say we are, that we don't exist, right? Are you using us as a narrative device to achieve the goal of someone else? And are we disposable? I mean, those are the questions that we have to check ourselves with when creating stories with trans characters. I'm not interested in this sort of positive versus negative space. That the antidote to negativity is not positivity. I believe it's nuance, it's complication, it's messy, and it's more. We just need more. That being said, the age-old question, is negative representation better than no representation? That's something I don't have an answer to. So when I say we just need more, it just kind of begs that question. But before I can even actually answer that question honestly, I do want to circle back to what Amy was saying, is you need to hire trans people to do this now. We're in a course corrective moment. Eventually, I don't think it'll be as precious that trans people are leading the way. But right now, we do need trans people to be making these decisions. Until we have more trans people in decision-making positions, none of this will change.
Can you add to that, Amy? What's your dream representation?
Well, I think, I agree with Sam. It's just more. And I think you get, I think that until and unless you have real inclusion in who gets to tell the stories and how they're told and who's producing them, and you know, and until we see you know, more inclusion and not just diversity in, you know, who's in front of the camera, but until, you know, power is inclusive, you know, then we'll see these kind of incremental changes, but we won't really be able to, you know, kind of reach some sense of like, okay, now this is not an issue anymore. Which of course, you know, that sense of liberation is when, you know, when you're not struggling.
Great, thank you. Would you tell us a little bit more about your impact campaign? Maybe Amy, you could start on this one. You know, in what ways is the film influencing the conversation right now?
Oh, you know, we started even before we finished the film thinking about and dreaming about what the impact could be. We've been working with Eliza Licht and Red Owl as our impact producers, and they've brought together over 50 community partners. You know, we were so happy to be picked up by, you know, and to become a Netflix original, but we also, despite COVID, wanted to show this film in community. We wanted to have it reach audiences beyond its entertainment value as something on a streaming platform. So we've partnered with GLAAD and creative guilds and unions to provide trans sensitivity training to creatives and film crews and industry executives. We've been working with diversity, equity, and inclusion HR people to help inform those trainings to include trans issues. And we've been working with national organizations and even some multinational corporations have been open to, you know, using clips from Disclosure to really try to understand bias against trans people. You know, the film, of course, is kind of a natural for, you know, media studies and universities and kind of furthering kind of conversation around media literacy in the classroom. And we were just on the, you know, in the process of working kind of university-wide in an education program. And then I think one of the things we're most proud of is early on a group of California judges came to Netflix and said, we'd love to use some clips with our group and kind of work on showing judges how bias against trans people works in the courtroom. And so now we're also, you know, working with attorneys at the ACLU and trying to expand that reach so that you know, we can have an impact in the courtroom. So these different sectors, you know, are, you know, we're working to, you know, really hopefully, you know, advance the conversation in all those different areas.
Amazing work. Thank you so much for all of it. Sam, can I come back to you? You've had a minute now. Do you want to tell us about how you saw yourself? You've had plenty of time to think about it.
Right.
Who did you identify with on screen as a kid? No, you want to go there?
I don't have a satisfying answer. I really don't. I'm sorry. I think that's probably why I started making stuff.
Yeah, maybe that was your drive to get this made.
Yeah.
And can you tell me anything more about the superhero? No.
It's in development.
Oh. Is that autobiographical in any way?
No,
Is it about Amy?
I honestly think everything people make is a portrait of themselves in some way or another.
Great. Okay. So what are you going to do next, you two? Are you making another film together, or?
You know, I'm in this place where I can't fathom raising money. so exhausting with disclosure. It was so hard.
Mm.
So I'm kind of open to the opportunities that are coming out of working on disclosure, where suddenly an agent approached me and a manager. Like, these are things I didn't even know was possible. It was never something I imagined for myself. And quite honestly, I had to Google a lot to even understand what those people did. So that's kind of where I'm at, and just kind of forming those relationships and seeing, what kind of work I can do that won't be as soul sucking in terms of raising money. And so I'm developing a couple scripts with some writers, and working on a few different things right now. Amy?
Very exciting. Amy?
And well, we're finally starting to see the end of this very long tail of disclosure. We've been working on the impact campaign, and as that's been starting to come to a close, I'm a consulting producer on a new film by Pratibha Parmar called My Name is Andrea, about Andrea Dworkin, that is in production right now, and I'm very excited about that project. And yeah, I'm taking a much needed break soon and really looking forward to it, and I'm sure I'll ramp up in the near future.
That sounds great. Fabulous plans. Can I ask you if you've seen anything good lately? Anything at DocFest that you recommend before all our passes run out? Or anything good on Netflix you would recommend?
Oh gosh. I always pause at that because I feel like I don't want to single people out and leave others out. So I'm going to pass on that question.
Fair enough. Same with you, Amy?
Well, I haven't seen anything at the festivals this year. I have to confess, I took a break from the festivals and didn't look at anything. So, last year was so incredible. I felt like we were, one of so many amazing documentary films. It was such an honor to be considered, to be presented at Sundance when we were, and we had gotten into a lot of festivals. We were meant to travel before COVID shut everything down, and I it was a thrill to be, for our film to come out in a year where there were so many amazing films. And of those, I have to say I was a really, really huge fan of Crip Camp. I thought that it was a beautiful film. And yeah, that it's funny when you said, it's random, but that's the film that popped into my mind from last year for me.
Great. Oh, thank you so much for this. It's been fascinating. Again, I hugely recommend this film to everybody who hasn't seen it yet. And please do tell your friends to look at this film. The audience for this Sheffield Masterclass is probably a little bit self-selecting. And I think what we really need is for everybody to see this film, right, Amy and Sam? And not just those of us who might tune in to the Disclosure Masterclass. I'm certainly going to go and call my mother now and ask her to watch Disclosure on Netflix, which will probably ruin tomorrow for me. If you could all go and call one person who might not find it by themselves, that would be delightful. In the meantime, just huge thanks to you both for all your hard work. I really sincerely hope that you were rewarded for all of this work eventually, even if it was painful to get there. And it's just been an absolute pleasure to think about your film and talk to you today. So many thanks.
Thank you, Daisy. Thank you.
Conversations like this are very rewarding. Thank you.
Yes, indeed.
Great. Thank you. And thanks everyone for listening. Enjoy the end of DocFest, and hopefully we'll all be back in person next year, happily drinking in the showroom bar We'll try and get Amy and Sam to come and hang out with us then.
We'd love that.
Bye
Thank
for
you.
now.
Bye.